Chapter 21, Rebirth. My breath returned to me, cold air rushing into my overheated lungs. My eyes slowly registered a sight before me, a blurry shape backed by soft yellow lights. It was a face, the expression troubled, a thick brow. I felt two hands against the side of my head. I then remembered. I occupied this body, but I could not remember where I was. "Oh, you stupid, stupid boy," said a voice in Khoorhani. I then felt pain all over my body. Burns. I then remembered the face. It was Bren. "I saw Stan!" I coughed and pointed to somewhere. Bren laughed. "You are a sweet idiot," Bren said. "Don't talk. Sleep." I then suddenly felt no pain, only a sweet surge of opiates. When I awoke, however, I was reintroduced to the pain from being burned along my arms and shoulders. I rose, lifted myself from off a low bed, and followed the glow of light in this new metallic environment to where Bren was, reclined along a shiny black lectus. Before him was a large window through which I saw the most amazing vision, an illuminant orb contrasted by the darkness of space. It was like a copper, blue, and white marble. I knew it was Bane. How Bren described it all coming back to me. My lips parted at the sight, letting loose a gasp. Tiny lit objects floated about Bane, golden and silver crafts like angels descending to it, like fireflies busily buzzing about it. Bren, with his back turned, his face peering into a folded piece of thick paper, said, "Your burns are mainly healed. It's a miracle you even survived. In the ignorance of your slumber, I don't think you can appreciate this." He rose, putting down his papers. He was dressed exquisitely, his boots a glossier and shinier pair than what he wore in Archaea, his pants navy with disciplined creases. He was wearing a matching jacket with a high folded collar edged in vibrant gold, a golden insignia, a cross, centered by a star, hung over the breast pocket, and a long length of white sleeves extended beyond the knuckles of his hands. "I guess you were lucky your clothes caught on fire, or the alarm would have not indicated your presence until, you were dead." "Where's Medea?" I pressed. "Questions," he said, reservedly, turning his hands upward in consternation as he paced about, the sound of his boots echoing within the small enclosure we were in. My pilot had it in him to plunge a heavy wrench into your skull and jettison you into space to avoid having to account for you with the inspectors. Couldn't have that, could we? So, we put you under for your journey to the liner so that you were not screaming, not much, at least, and then, once there, got you off to the onboard medical unit where, luckily, they were able to stick you in one of their tanks and repair all that burned skin. You actually look well, Josh. I'm amazed." I did seem well. As if nothing happened. I looked at my hands and saw mild scarring. My arms, hairless. My hair was shorter, no longer waist length, because no doubt singed. "Where's Medea?" I asked again. I'm insulted. Was it her all along? You stow away on my vessel and absolutely foul up my work, and you have the nerve to ask me more inane questions! He yelled in a manner that I had never imagined, as if the sheep's clothing had come off to reveal a wolf's nature. I was quiet, shocked, stunned, and almost fell back, feeling weakened by it. I felt short of breath. "I'm sorry, Josh," Bren said, and he approached me quickly and guided me to sit on his couch. I looked over my shoulder at the outside. Beautiful, isn't it? I was quiet. To answer your question, Medea has been rushed back to Banks. She more than likely arrived there weeks ago. We, however, have only just arrived to... Bren stopped and began our game of fill-in-the-blank. Paen. I gasped. Not Banks. I slept the whole journey. I felt crushed by my apparently staggering failure. I began to cough, my chest aching. Bren sat next to me and explained that the Riftliner, a larger space vessel that I did not get to see, transported Bren's commission vessel back across the rift to planet Banks first. There, agents met him and picked Medea up and brought her home. From there, Bren's vessel traveled, well, at this phase of Banks' orbit, a good 30 million miles, Josh. Almost 2 months, and brought us to our final destination here. We are docking with one of the orbitals in another 2 hours, and then we'll take my private shuttle down to the surface. Bren explained. I had failed, utterly. I brought my knees into my chest and buried my face into my folded arms. So, what am I to do with you? Bren said, again rising from off the couch. I suppose you're stuck with me. Oh, and all that damned leftover gold, well, that just paid the fuel bill, really, then your doctor's bill. I don't understand what possessed you to jump into the ship. Can you explain? I told him again about Master Paen's vision, about Medea, about her being his devotee. I told him what I must do. Bren handed me a glass of water, long, clean fingers extended from beneath laced sleeves. Cruel of him, he said. What? To make you believe such things. His gray eyes were dull in their condescension. I reacted. Again, I'm being rude, but Medea's just a child, nothing more, Josh. To ask you to ruin your entire life is shameful. To ask you to come here is mind-boggling. I would kill to have your wild and free life in Archaea. Won't you then? I bit at him, becoming accustomed to its sarcastic demeanor. Bren raised an eyebrow, and he apparently again remembered that he underestimated me. Point well taken, Josh. I'm a warrior, just like you, a soldier. I follow orders from command. Do you know what command loves, what their appetite is for? I pressed at him. Really? Now listen, nothing is so black and white. Look, it's obvious that you have talents, Josh, and I rather like you. He marked my expression of disbelief, sighed, and huffed. If I didn't, old Barton in the control room back there would have succeeded in braining you when he discovered you. And he would have just wiped the stain of you off his windows. Now the old geezer has to show off that black eye I gave him once he brings you and I, my new partner in crime, to port. So I suppose it's you who owes him an apology. He was right. My expression softened, and my eyes put away their daggers. Bren then said, At any rate, I do like you, Josh. So very much so that it is my own home that I'm opening up to you until we can sort out this wretched mess you've made of your life. I cannot bring you to Sten, though, and Banks even more so. I listened intently, knowing that I had little choice. I had no guide whatsoever in this level of the madness that my life was fast becoming. Now, if you don't accept, I can only point you to certain unpleasant avenues to traverse independently on the surface once we arrive. But it would be a disservice of me to not enlighten you to the fact that under no circumstances would you ever be able to climb aboard a ship and simply travel to Banks on your own. No, my friend, it is utterly naive to think it's so simply done in this mean world you found yourself, well, rather reborn into, it appears. No one, not even the best of us, goes to Banks, and not because of the war, but because it's off limits. You had no idea, Josh, just how well you already had it on Sten. My heart was heavy because of him, his presence, his hubris. I sighed, and I felt a slight tug as I remembered the vivid purple horizon and the feeling of that place that allowed me to release my clenched position in Bren's company. Bren began to walk away. "Bren," I said. "Prince Jeshibian Khoorhrhani, yes." I laughed. "Thank you for saving my life, Bren Edgewood. It was stupid of me to jump aboard uninvited." "Yes, in that hatch you could have burned to an unrecognizable cinder, and we'd be smelling it for weeks, not knowing what the hell it was." "Awful. You're welcome, and now, so that you don't jump into my house uninvited, you already have my welcome to join me below in 2 hours." "I will join you on planet Bane." "Not dressed like that, you won't. I had you measured while you slept and ordered some clothes to be delivered. They should be waiting for us on Orbital 3. And Bren departed into the darkness of the secondary cabin, headed to the control room to speak with Old Barden, the hired pilot, a man I would thankfully never meet. Chapter 22. Tell Allal, an Edgewood House. My new costume was much like Bren's. Black, shiny leather boots with brass buckles. My pants were gray, creased and uncomfortably tight to me. The coat felt too tight as well, but was considered a perfect fit by Bren. It had 2 breast pockets that were bare of decoration, only simple red lines stitched and a rectangular pattern at the top of the button flap. On the 2 shoulder flaps, before leaving the orbital en route to Bren's shuttle, Bren slipped 2 blue canvas insignias with yellow crosses, much like what Bren wore on his jacket. Anyone approaches you are a second-year Tel Allal cadet, and refer to me as Byron? I interrupted. No. I am Major Edgewood, your commanding officer, and you study, and you will study, mind you, at Konovich Military Academy. Bren instructed, and pulled my shirt sleeves further out over my hands, and inspected and straightened the lace tie around my neck, flaring it out a little, and then pulling the thick material of the jacket edges neatly around it. He had bound my hair in the manner he did his own, but with a blue ribbon, tying what was left of my dreadlocks together tightly. Oh, so awkward, this, he complained, much the way Minot did when preparing me for official appearances in Archaea. We debarked at a massive military space station, where we entered a busy flow of people, an ocean of souls, all dressed in our manner, and all of Bren's complexion and walking in different directions across a smooth, black, reflective floor. Many were dressed in slightly different colored uniforms, gray being the most common color, made distinct by emblems on the breast pocket and shoulder flaps. Crowds of them, young faces like my own, though stern in their intent to quickly move on with their business, pressed onward through the many avenues of the busy Orbital 3, which is where Bren said we were. It's the 3rd of 6, all positioned over the sovereign nations of Bane, Bren said, apparently beginning my next phase of my education. He must have noted my interest in the giant red 3, painted on the columnar slabs of metal that arched upward into the high-grated ceilings. Bodies rushed by at a frenzied pace as if preparing for an imminent attack. I was impressed by the glass windows, their sheer size and thickness, held in sturdy frames with massive bolts. The windows bold, oversized rectangles, looking outward to space where a swarm of vehicles could be seen, making their approach or departure. There were women in the ranks of their military, their hair bound or cut short, some standing guard at certain entrances, their steady eyes seeming to look nowhere. I noticed officers, captains and majors who wore black uniforms, some beige, some round flat top caps that flared out, gleaming patent leather bands decorated with that now familiar golden cross and star at the center and at the front, and held over the modest and stiff bill that cast a serious shadow over the eyes. Josh, do not make eye contact with officers, not unless they call you to attention, Bren warned. I averted my curious gaze and then looked outward to space, to Bane and all the stars in her solar system. It was extremely frigid in the walkway, steam emitting from my mouth. I became excited by the scene as I walked next to Bren and listened. The war with the Trikes is bad now, Josh. It appears we suffered in our last battle here at Bane. Another attack is coming. I'll explain more once we're in the private shuttle, but for now, 1, 2, 1, 2, I nodded. At the gate, we were alone, waiting and looking down at the edge of the planet. The shuttle arrived, a small golden craft that gently docked and fastened itself to the gate's access hatches. A gentle breeze brushed by as the access doors opened, revealing a much more welcoming interior. A servant stepped out of the warm glow and bowed to us. He wore a long, dark coat buttoned at the breast and opened beneath to expose an ornately gold-patterned black waistcoat, matching breeches with gold buttons at the knees over his tall, leather-black boots. "My lord," he said. "Harlan, thank God," Bren said. "Quite good to see you, sir. Welcome back," he said. The two shook hands, and then Harlan approached me, bowed, and said, "Prince Khoorhani, I am pleased to finally make your acquaintance." "How's the old girl?" Bren joked, speaking for the first time fondly of an intimate whom he had never before mentioned to me. "The Countess is well and looks forward to your safe return," Harlan replied warmly. We entered the small but comfortable confines of the shuttle, the interior of warm tones, oranges and reds offset by deep tones of wooden panels and bronze and copper instrumentation. Bren began to remove his uniform jacket, his hat. I did the same, following his lead. Once we were seated, Harlan depressed a copper button in a panel beside him and communicated to the pilot that we were ready to make the descent. I waited in eager anticipation and yet was terrified, drawing upon memories of my last encounter aboard a jump ship. We disengaged from the hatches with an audible thump and glided downward, the shuttle dipping nearly straight down. Outside I could see thousands of craft, like giant floating logs alight and lined infinitely outward along the curving edges of Paen. Most were giant gray or black hulks, but some were an audacious and regal silver. All carried that proud gold cross emblazoned on their sides. At least two of them I could see dwarfed the size of Orbital 3. I pressed my hand and face to the glass, unable to take my eyes off the activity. The craft were like hornets, leaving their nest. "You're looking at the Red Fleet, Joshua," Bren said, and he and Harlan spoke of an awful battle that ended only days before our arrival. "Yours was the last private shuttle granted access to Orbital 3, Harlan said. As we dropped, the shuttle began to shake, and the windows went white with the reflection of sunlit clouds. My heart raced. I was afraid, anticipating the same rough treatment I endured last time. But the shaking soon stopped, and instead, I just felt gentle pressure. We seemed to level out, and after some time I noted that the craft was flying. I looked out of the window for hours, taking in this bird's eye view. Bren watched me, enjoying my reaction to what I saw. I grinned as we gently flew. Then, unable to fight it, I fell asleep for what seemed like hours, my head still against the cool glass. I was awakened by the sound of Bren's voice as he groaned. "Oh my God!" The shuttle was flying low, and I could see the terrain more clearly below. Allal was a majestic sprawl of a city, many of its tall, ornate spires forming the line of a silvery horizon, but as I looked closely, the place seemed wrapped in smoke and soot. Directly below us was unbelievable destruction. Paved roads decimated and littered with rubble and dirt, most of it ablaze and releasing smoke into the atmosphere. Just outside I could see a small and agile craft flying alongside ours. Two more above it, a military escort. "I'm afraid this round they've given us quite a walloping, sir," Harlan said, quietly standing over Bren, who was looking outward and obviously fighting back emotion. There were large craters where tall, majestic buildings once stood, Brent explained. "Any report of the dead?" he asked. "Hundreds of thousands, sir." "And how many of them are dead?" Bren stiffened. his tone revealing a thirst for vengeance as he spoke of his enemy, who I now began to hate as well as I felt Bren's deepening pain. Well, sir, the good General Mallory has performed with his usual competence and bravery, destroying at least 2 flagships, but they say the Trican Armada has pulled back beyond Petrus, only to regroup with another approaching wave of ships. It seems they are only intent on wearing us down. They seem to keep coming from nowhere, and keeping our attention well away from the Diamond region. Bren gnashed his teeth angrily as he looked at the devastation below, pressing his hand against the rectangle of glass. Have those damned hawks pulled their heads out of their asses yet? This is what's in store for them, shield or no shield, Bren growled. Well, sir, Harlan reassured him. General Wilhelm's Black Fleet is giving chase and giving them hell as we speak, and Planet Banks is finally committed to an offensive at this point. We will no doubt draw compensatory measures of Trike blood, Harlan said, then snapped his own lapels proudly in a neat line. Then, in graceful movements, he sat on a yellow chair and turned it on its base to face Bren. He offered Bren tea and he accepted. They seemed like brothers, sure of their suffering and sure they will indeed carry on. This did not seem to calm Bren's nerves, however. He leaned back in his own yellow leather chair and folded one leg over his knee, his expression grim. He noticed me, sighed, and said, Perhaps it was best you left Sten after all, Joshua. This is what's in store for it. God damn it. The Trikes are enemies of Banks? I asked. Bren nodded. Of every inhabitant world they encounter, Harlan sighed. The ghost ships of manifest destiny upon our seas, Harlan hummed. Oh, please. No poems, not now, Bren complained. I thought of my dream of the fireball, the destruction of Archaea. Where am I? Why am I here? I thought. Harlan, Bren said, I feel as though I've wasted too much time chasing wild geese beyond the rift. I should have been here. Sir, your duty called you beyond. We are glad you are home, Harlan reassured him. The craft trembled as it hovered over a smooth black surface below that was edged by blue blinking lights. Bren and Harlan were in the midst of laughing, reminiscing. Below, a large vibrant field of green grass stood in contrast against the black landing area. There were 4 more of these circular and railed pads with short roads leading to them, bridges running across a moat. In the center of these extended roadways I could see a large gray building. Edgewood House. It was a massive beige square with large windows with panes of gold. A green courtyard in its center. 4 backlit spires at each corner reached upward, glowing against the setting Banish sun as the ship turned and slowly descended. On one end of the great house I saw damage, rubble, and large craters in the green fields. I could hear Bren swearing through the sound of my ears popping from the descent. Harlan, how did we manage to make it through this one? I would say by the help of the entirety of the 7th Jolelian Fighter Squadron, sir. If you look down that way there, you will see they are clearing a downed Trican bomber. 1 of 6. Damned impressive dogfighting, sir. A fellow by the name of Caridian caught that one. Sounds like a Jolelian pilot, all right. I wouldn't mind shaking his hand. How is my aunt taking this? Bren said, obviously shocked. Unshaken, of course, as expected, but thankfully, she was not here and will not be returning for some time. Things to do elsewhere, I do understand. I find it interesting that our small house has drawn the protection of the Seventh, Bren said, and I picked up on a certain mystery in his tone. I thought you would, sir. The craft touched down and the hatch opened, letting us out onto the wet landing pad. As we stepped out, I was struck by a penetrating blast of coldness and sleet. Bren tossed me my gray coat, which I quickly put on, as I followed his urgent footsteps to the house, which was lit in front. This was nothing like anything I had ever seen, 4 times the size of the royal estate in Archaea. Bren surely must have been a king, I thought. The vehicle approached us, and to my amazement there was no driver. It brought us the length of the road leading over the lit bridges, across the moat, and to the front entrance, 2 large wooden doors several times my size. The doors automatically swung open slowly as Harlan approached, and as heat spilled out of the entryway, the glowing and massive interior was revealed. To our left, a giant fire was burning. To our right, another, each in a pit big enough to walk into. Before me was a giant balcony revealing the second level, over which, again, the Banish golden cross and star was flown. A pronounced canvas banner with a black background hanging against the marble surface. Oh, well now, isn't that a wee bit of patriotic flair? Bren mumbled. Under the circumstances, sir, I would say a necessary wee bit for now, Harlan said, while taking Bren's coat and then mine. He walked to the rack to hang them. Any messages? Did I ask that already? No, sir. And yes, you did, 3 times. You are tired, sir. Yes. Above the banner was an enormous candelabrum of jade and crystal. I leaned my head back to take it in and was struck by the azure and gold work in the arches of the vaulted ceilings. All around me were gold and rubies, emeralds and ornaments. But I was exhausted from the millions of miles Bren informed me we traveled, and did not have the strength to wonder any more of my surroundings. Then there were passageways leading left and right beneath the stairs, which Bren headed for. He waved back to me and said, Harlan, make sure Josh gets everything he needs in any of the quarters upstairs. We don't have any guests, do we? No, sir. Right away, sir. And so, in silence, I followed Harlan upstairs, my final effort, before I would fall into the deepest of sleeps. Chapter 23. The Reeducation of Joshua Khoorhani. When I awoke, in perhaps the most luxurious bed imaginable, in the quietest of rooms entirely devoid of the smell of animals or the bite of insects, I looked outside of the house windows to see that it was still dark outside. I ventured out, only wearing the new pants Bren gave me. I went downstairs and wandered about the many rooms of House Edgewood. There were swords on the walls that I admired and portraits of interesting faces. The floors were covered by large squares of patterned rugs that my feet sank into. I ventured through many empty parlors, some cold with disuse. I passed servants who tried their best not to be too curious about me, the shirtless savage running about without shoes. Finally, I detected a glow down the distance of the hall, and I followed it. I came to another small parlor with a humble fireplace glowing against the sheen of a leather chair in which Bren was seated and reading his papers. "Ah, Joshua," he said, "I was wondering how long you would rest." I yawned. Have I actually slept through the entire day? Indeed. It'll take you a few days to get acquainted with our shorter days. Sten was such a big, slowly rotating world. He motioned for me to sit in the empty chair across from him. I did so as Harlan entered the room. "I think you would enjoy some tea, sir." Bren nodded. "Food as well, no doubt," he added. "So," Bren said, "any questions?" I only widened my eyes to express that I did not know where to begin. I was so overwhelmed, removed entirely from myself, reborn, as he said, the past 2 months a strange and distant dream. Well, there's much I'd like to explain to you. Harlan brought us the tea. I sipped it until the fog was lifted from my attention. Bren leaned forward over the mahogany table that separated us and flipped a golden switch embedded into it. A hatch opened in a corner section of the table, and out of it a golden box was raised at the end of a small rod. Bren then flipped another switch and light came out of the box. Before me, projected over the table, were the heavens, dust, space, stars. It was a map of their solar system called the Banks Isethene, as Bren explained. I then saw the constellations that were in my dreams months ago. "The rift, Joshua, is here," Bren said, picking up his explanation as he began 2 months ago. He pointed with a laser to a spot near the tiny purple representation of planet Banks. He explained that the rift was a wormhole in orbit around the planet. But before we tackle the rift, you have to know that we go through it only by means of this. Bren tossed an object to me, a white crystal. It's called tension, a kind of fuel. That is what you saw them mining in Nakayo. I encourage you to read more about it, but simply put, its properties allow us to travel through this hole that otherwise we would travel across as normal space. Tension is rare on planet Bane, but not on planet Banks, where our colonial excavators found it initially, Bren explained. With it, Bane's ships travel faster, which in turn led to the discovery of the Diamond region. Bren then showed me the image of my homeworld, projected it into the air. We call it this because of the uncanny amount of tension found on your planet, Sten. They're great stores of tension mined by both Banes and now the Trikes. We're competing with them for the tension, for Sten, and obviously for our very own star system, which they intend to relinquish us of entirely. I listened intently, the tea waking me. 2 spotted hounds entered the room quietly and sat next to Bren, who only with an index finger commanded them to lie down as he went on. Banish ships at first seemed to vanish in orbit around planet Banks, but soon we learned about the rift and its effect on tension-propelled ships. It seems best described as an attractant of opposite poles. An activated tension vessel passes through here, just above Banks. When we later intentionally penetrated through, we found the graveyard of our lost ships in the decaying orbit around your planet. But you said it was impossible to get to Banks. How then does Bane get to the Diamond region, my planet? I asked. Good question. Diplomacy. For centuries we've had trade agreements with Banks for access. Now, though, only their liners provide transport for our corporations, and we trade in tech and military services. I don't understand. Bane has a stronger military and yet pays to pass through. We could take it by force. Yes, but Bane is not interested in conquering Banks, for it's too expensive. Those were the mistakes learned from colonialism, which proved too costly. That was centuries ago, but still, there is bad blood for those years, which brings me to my next point, Joshua. The image of Banks returned to view, now bigger. There were satellites in orbit around the planet, which now had a subtle yellow glow around it. These satellite stations emit a shield that prevents any foreigners from landing on the surface of their world. Any attempt to break through results in triggering a pretty sophisticated weapon system. They are a close society now, Bren said. Quite brilliant, actually, Harlan added, passing through. Bane unknowingly built the infrastructure for them, the orbital systems we sold them. They turned it into a wall. An Archaean fence, I mused. Pretty much, Bren said. We brewed the resentment to motivate their intentions. Quite true, and now we have this bloody business with the Trikes to share between us and the reluctant allies that are the Hawks. Harlan said. Seems ironic, no? Who are the Hawks? I asked. Bren explained that Hoktoin was the native word for the Banks people, particularly the ruling class. He went on to tell me of conflict on their world whereby the governmental body, the Sanhedrin, run by their conservative parties, had subjugated the Hoktoin Natsade, the humanist parties, for nearly a century. I had naively assumed Bren was speaking of Medea's people. Oh no, you see, there is a difference. Hoktoin Natsade is different from pure Natsade. Natsade is of itself an ideal of purity that both parties ascribe to and yet fail, Bren explained further. You must say that Natsade means children of God, sir, Harlan said. It sounds like something you'd say, Harlan. Anyway, I was getting to that. Both sides have fought over who rightly is that. The children of God, a conflict no different from the struggles of our many ancient crusades here on Bane, Joshua. Medea and those like her who fulfill age-old prophecies is considered to be pure Natsade by the Hoktoin Natsade. And according to that political group, the pure should rule as they once did. This is their agenda, that the old model be restored, placing their holy ones above all political bodies, as it was centuries ago, Bren said. Until we arrived and changed all of that, Harlan said. The ruling conservatives reject the old way, of course, and believe their own will to be divinely ordained without a need to submit to the old model, Bren said. Then he sipped his tea. I could only think of Master Paen whispering into my father's ears to trust him. Each side, Joshua, uses Medea as a scapegoat of sorts. The right hand to declare her invalid in the face of modern times and to destroy. And the left hand to rally around her, their view a distorted lens of esotericism and violent uprising to bring back an ancient ideal, Harlan added, now sitting cross-legged on a wooden chair and sipping tea along with Bren. Once Medea and her small circle were found, the rumors circulating that the prophecy of her birth had been fulfilled, each side pursued her, they explained. Their death squads, Joshua, countless numbers of secret murders going on as both sides try to invalidate the other. We believe the Sanhedrin have carried out the worst. Indeed, we fear genocide. The Haktoin Natsare, well, they simply shout Medea's name as they carry out their acts of terrorism, Bren explained. I could take no more of it. Where is she? Is she safe? Why did you not bring her here? I demanded, standing. I trembled. Here, I was safe before comforting firelight, and out there in the black void of space, my master's devotee was unsafe. Bren leaned back in his chair. He removed his spectacles and dug into the corners of his eye. He sighed. I was told, I was assured that, he stammered. I buried my face in my hands at what I was hearing. I grabbed my hair. I was lied to, Joshua. Used. As an agent, I'm often only a means to an end. What does that mean? You handed over a defenseless child to men who would use her or murder her? I was so angry that I began to cough violently and I felt nauseated. Bren stood up, trying to reassure me. There was a marked show of concern on his face. No, he exclaimed. You need to listen to me. I did everything I could. Sometimes you can do no more. The Sanhedrin goons, they came to our ship while docked in the belly of the liner with several armed men. They intercepted me. And the worst of it was that it was my own government that sold her out, that told the Hawks I was aboard with her. He seemed to ache with regret, and so I calmed. Why? I asked, still coughing a little. Apparently, BSS used her whereabouts as leverage to negotiate. Bren sighed, obviously frustrated and bewildered. Negotiate? I asked. Another inane question. Bren became agitated with me. Negotiate better terms for access to Sten. And now terms for Banks's active military commitment to the offensive taking place. Terms for the release of Bane's held captive in previous wars. It's my job to create leverage for our terms to be met, often at the cost of my own soul. I should say, what kind of warrior hides in the shadows and delivers a child to devils? I attacked, the caffeine rushing through me. I could see that stung him, the guilt showing on his face. There seemed more to it. I breathed heavily, committed to getting answers and gearing up to fight him. Just then, Bren stood up over the coffee table and threw his hand at the floating hologram, splintering it violently. The kind of warrior who serves the realm you've just entered into, Joshua. A realm where there is no justice, only dogs eating dogs, and where honor is only the decoy of the left hand, held high while the right one conceals a dagger low and behind the back. I've been naive in handling Medea, but I should remind you that it was no heaven on your stand. It was full of just as much war and treachery. You've made an unforgivable mistake, I shouted, and then wheezed and sat. had no words, only anger and anguish. I did not want to be there. I could not understand what this failure of mine meant, other than being the worst insult to Paen and a dark betrayal of Medea. I gave myself no option to succeed in going blindly forward into that damned shuttle. I sat in the parlor and stubbornly waited to wake up again in the dewy grasses, knowing Minot was nearby or with Ursia's arms around me. This world was confusing, deeply layered. The warmth of the fire was like a single narrow wave, and all around it, in this musty Banish parlor with this peculiar man, was deep cold. Will they really kill her? I asked, remembering Paen, remembering Medea at play in the riverbeds on Sten. They will. It will take some time, though. They will hold her for some time. There is a chance to save her. What do you mean? I pressed, snatching my head upward. Bren sighed as Harlan re-entered the room, this time holding a large bronze tray of food. He placed it on the low table before me. Bren said, there are plans involving Bane itself that, if they go as hoped, will allow a more direct approach. Without getting too far ahead of ourselves, sir, Harlan warned, seemingly afraid of who might be spying on us. Let's just call it a much-needed deep cleaning. Harlan joked, then turned on a device that played music. It was uncomfortably loud. Bren inched closer to me from across the table and said, my aunt is working on this. I should not have even referred to it so openly. She has the support she needs to make a significant change here, one that will surely retool the machinery that was careless with both of our lives, Riffside. I can't explain it all now, Josh. I just know that I am not your enemy. I owe you my very life, and I will make good on that debt. He said, I know you are frustrated, Joshua. I know I don't truly understand what she means to you quite yet. Be patient, my friend. I've learned one thing in my line of work. It is to keep quietly adapting, even if signs that should shatter all your hopes of success. I sucked inward, feeling sick, and nodded. I have insulted you again, Bren. I apologize. Being a stranger in a strange land sometimes gives a certain edge to our lesser qualities. I'm no stranger to lesser qualities within myself, but I certainly would not willfully destroy the life of one as beautiful as Medea. In fact, I cherish her and what she means to you, Bren said, nodding to Harlan to lower the volume on the audio system. After Harlan reported the house was clean of spying devices, Bren told me the story of how he tracked Medea down on Sten, took a liner rift side, evaded his overseers, and stowed away on a docked Hoktoan shuttle for 30 days. Once on the ground, he investigated, looking for Medea's captors. From town to town. He was masquerading as a man named Byron Pentax, a tension man, contracted to extract crystal tension for several buyers. BSS financed his cover, knowing that the Hokt government would hide her in an outlying town until they could safely extract her. Bren kept losing Medea because her captors were sure either Bane agents, such as Bren, or Natsade monks were tracking her. He was not finding her, was on the verge of giving up, getting drunk and beaten up in taverns until finally something caught his inner eye. Something tugged at his consciousness and clued him in on where to go. It was like I only needed to be worn out, broken and humiliated before it dawned on me. The indigenous. She was hidden among the Odan tribes. He bought a mera and set out, and in another 10 days of looking he finally saw her. He told me the details of how he secured a 2-man shuttlecraft and stole Medea from the plainsman tribe paid to protect her. It turned out her captors were actually her circle, not the Hakdo conservatives or the Natsade. I snatched her from the Odan, and that's how I got that damn needle in my ass, packing her away and getting into the ship. In retrospect, I should have just helped them.
Edgewood House. Edgewood House is a grand 39th century country house near Oldston, Greenshire, Allal. Its park was laid out by Lewis Black, the Allalian landscape architect dubbed Allalal's finest gardener. He designed over 150 parks, many of which still endure. The Edgewood House was built by order of Emperor Edwin I in 3897 for Lord Henry Edgewood, a general who participated, then as a Paljalian captain, in returning the Paljalian Dauphiel family to the throne in the end of the 39th century. See Ephesian Empire circa 986 AD. Edgewood was given the title of Earl of Oldston. The great house was subsequently the residence of Edwin's descendants, marriage linking the two families, and now is currently run by Countess Gwendolyn Edgewood, a great-grandniece of Edwin I and hereditary heiress as designated by Letters Patent 3896. The house is noteworthy not only for its fine Norman architecture, but for its symbolizing of, along with the construction of other 3 great houses in Allal, Paljal's return to power and the reunification of the kingdom. House Edgewood was often thought of as a house of the king's enforcers, as the family generally stayed clear of local Allalian affairs, only serving as a reminder of the emperor's supremacy, as each member of the Edgewood family held high military positions and fought in numerous wars, both planetside and interplanetary. Many sections of the famous house were rebuilt over the centuries, but the entrance tower, with its famed fan-vaulted ceilings and azure and gold, ornate tracery, and pinnacles at each corner of the house, are the original and have only been minimally restored in keeping with family tradition.
The sound of air raid sirens became a normal thing to me. But my second night at Edgewood House, the sounds of bombs exploding drove me into a wild panic, forcing Bren to hold me to the floor so that I would not run from the basement shelter. Instead, now as sirens blared, I read more and more from the Edgewood Library. The library contained countless books and pressings, the thick and folded papers Bren subscribed to. I read as if deaf to the bombing raids above. As I sat in the dusty basement with Bren, Harlan, and the servants, I read The Opposing Tension Rift Theories, or The Haktoan Wars of 3876, so engaged that each boom and the sand falling from the cracked ceiling to the concrete floor could be ignored. After 10 or so minutes of the sand and debris falling, Harlan would impulsively place his own reading down, fetch a broom, sweep up the dust, and return to his reading. When it was all done, we all went upstairs to stake out the damage. A shattered window here, large craters at the landing pads, and sometimes the unfortunate grazing of a wall. The Jolilians, the pilots flying atmospheric fighters, were unbeatable. After a raid, they flew over Edgewood House in a V formation as a salute to the Countess. "All of this is quite unnecessary," Harlan grumbled. "They cracked 2 windows in the south end last time around, flying too damned close. Look at them! They're magnificent!"
Bren hollered, over the roar as he waved at 12 fighters overhead, their craft blinking lights at him in acknowledgement. The noise was deafening and the treetops swayed by the rush of them. I waved as well, raising my fisted hands like Bren, whooped and celebrated along with the servants. We were all happy to not have been obliterated as the fighters pulled away and rocketed into the dark indigo sky. They were impressive, dark gray and copper night daggers, flying in noisy authority. Bren passed me a cigar and chewed on the end of one for himself, patting me on the back as well as we walked into the entryway. Come on, Josh. We survived another one, and so, time for a brandy. I wonder if they know her grace is not here, Harlan complained of the flyers. I, for one, am not going to radio them that, Harlan, Bren said. You should be happy she still has a home to come back to. To soothe our nerves, we drank. While seated around a grand table, Bren, Harlan, and I, bottle by bottle, day by day, cleared out the Countess's cellar stock of brandy. Harlan had been broken of his formalities. Bren insisted he take off his coat, drape it along the mahogany back of the dining room chairs, and sit to read and drink with us until again that dreadful sound of the air raid sirens warned us to turn off the lights and take shelter. In that time, Harlan taught me his native tongue, Ephrasion. He was fascinated that I could learn it, and he was interested in a challenge put forward by Bren, who wagered that I would be speaking fluently by the end of the bombing campaign. Joshua, vous êtes un communicateur naturel, Harlan exclaimed, drunk after we carried on in our first conversation in his language. How is it even possible? He asked me, swaying. I don't know, I said honestly. I only need a few words, and then a certain anticipation of the rest comes forward, marked with a certain voracious hunger to meet it. I explained. Does that even make sense? I asked, then swooned from the alcohol. They laughed, also intoxicated. Absolutely not. I'll take your word for it. Harlan slapped the table and laughed some more. Did you see what you did there? Bren belched, laughing more intensely. Oh, Harlan groaned. I suppose it's just interesting, fascinating, you know. Master Paen said there's only one sound, the root sound in the heart. I said, all the variances come from it. I like that idea, but I can't explain it. Not when I'm drunk. I suppose there's no alien tongue in truth. Their laughter subsided, heads lying on the messy table. That's quite profound, actually, Bren sighed. If only I weren't so drunk. Well, Harlan, you owe me 5 pounds. I'm speechless. Well, let's drink to Joshua the Communicator. A speech, then? I quipped. Never mind, you said that already, didn't you? And they doubled over again, laughing and clenching their guts. I laughed as well, but I still felt agitated by the weeks of confinement, sitting and waiting for the bombs to stop, then start again, and then stop. I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be going towards something, towards Medea. Is there anything to read from Banks, maybe to learn their language? I asked. I can certainly arrange that, Harlan said. Mallory victorious in the first and second sectors. Relief for Allal and Paljal has finally come as General Mallory's Black Fleet has decisively pushed the Trican Armada beyond the second sector, freeing Bane of the bombing raids and missile attacks that have caused tens of thousands of deaths and destruction to several cities. More on page 6. A great many servants arrived to Edgewood House, returning to fill the East Wing, and they busied themselves, restoring the place to meet the expectations of the Countess. It was rumored she was returning in the next few days. "Well, there goes our free reign of the place, guys," Brent joked while stroking the stubble on his chin. I stood in the passageway, in the way of passing maids where Lady Gwendolyn Edgewood's portrait hung. In the painting, she wore an exquisite navy blue and gold gown. She had deep, dark eyes, a squarish and yet delicate jawline, and her porcelain-colored cheeks were accentuated by deep and rich brown circlets of her hair that hung to her shoulders. "She's quite young in that one," I heard a voice say. Harlan's. "Beautiful," I said. "She is a distant relative of the Dauphiles, but an Ephesian, of course." He said that with a touch of Ephesian Tellalolian pride, an assertion to distinguish himself from the other servants of the house. "Look here," he said, and he handed me another paper. It was an article written about a Haktoan traditional musical act. They are defectors living on Bane. They are loved by the Countess, who finds their music fascinating. I will make arrangements for them to come for the celebration. My heart split with happiness as I looked at the picture in the article, looked into the face of the younger girl singer, a face so much like Medea's face. The article said she was a blue woman, a Hakt, who could only seem in my ignorance of their kind to be a picture of Medea when she was fully grown. It was only my imagination at work, of course, but still a lovely reminder of her. Against royal policy, Gwen hosts refugees. January 7, 4189. A family of Natsari refugees, musicians, arrived at Edgewood House in Tel Allal Thursday. Countess Gwendolyn Edgewood personally hosted them before the family embarked for the journey to their new home in Tel Allal metropolis. The family of Tiala Adu is one of 3 who escaped the concentration camps rumored to exist on planet Banks. The Haktoan Sanhedrin vehemently deny the existence of these camps. More on page 12.